She served tables beneath a red chandelier, invisible between whispers and silver. Black uniform, measured steps, pen poised. He laid $1,000 on white linen and asked for humiliation in another language. She replied. The room stopped breathing. His smile cracked. Her phone would ring at midnight. Rain. Glass. Silence. A message with an address. Some moments change everything forever. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across marble floors. Each shadow seemed deliberate, calculated. The Palazzo Nero restaurant hummed with whispered conversations and the soft clink of silver against porcelain. In the center booth, 4 men in charcoal suits sat like judges at a tribunal. Their watches caught the light. Expensive. Final. Vincent Vinny Torino leaned back in burgundy leather, his smile too wide for his eyes. 52 years old. Silver threading through black hair, hands that had never held anything rougher than Cuban cigars and Swiss timepieces. The kind of man who owned the city without ever needing to say it. You see what I love about this country? His voice carried across the dining room like smoke. Service without attitude. Respect without questions. His lieutenants laughed on cue. Empty sounds. Echoes in an expensive tomb. 20 feet away, Isabella Chen moved between tables with practiced invisibility. 26. Dark hair pulled tight. Uniform pressed sharp enough to cut. Her hands steady despite everything. Despite the weight of watching eyes, the pressure of silence, the constant measurement of worth in dollars and deference. She approached their table. The air grew thicker. Good evening, gentlemen. Are you ready to order? Her English was perfect. Clean, unaccented. The product of 4 years at Columbia before life decided she didn't deserve dreams. Vinny looked up slowly, deliberately. You speak pretty good for... He let the sentence hang like a noose. Isabella's pen poised over her notepad. Professional. Contained. For what, sir? Nothing, sweetheart, just making conversation. His smile widened. Shark white teeth. But I'm curious. How's your Italian? She met his eyes without flinching. I can take your order in English, sir. The menu has descriptions. The table went quiet. Even the ambient music seemed to pause. Vinny's fingers drummed against crystal. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed like a countdown. See? That's interesting. He turned to his men. She thinks I need help reading a menu. Low chuckles. Nervous energy. The kind of laughter that happens when nobody knows the rules but everyone feels the danger. Isabella breathed through her nose. Counted to 3. I apologize if I misunderstood. How can I help you tonight? Vinny studied her face like a document he was deciding whether to sign or burn. Behind his eyes, calculations ran. Power measured in moments. Control demonstrated through humiliation. Actually, I have a better idea. He reached into his jacket. Slow. Theatrical. Pulled out a money clip thick enough to choke on. Let's make this interesting. The restaurant's background noise faded. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to pause. I'll give you $1,000. He peeled off bills with ceremony. If you can serve me properly, in Italian. The money sat on white linen like evidence at a crime scene. 10 hundreds. More than Isabella made in a month. More than her brother's medical bills. More than the rent that was already 3 weeks late. She stared at the bills. They didn't move. Neither did she. Well? Vinny's voice carried amusement and something darker. Cat got your tongue? Isabella looked up. For the first time since approaching the table, she smiled. Not the practiced customer service smile. Something else. Something that made Vinny's confidence falter for exactly 1 heartbeat. No, sir, she said quietly. I was just deciding where to begin. The silence stretched. Taut. Ready to snap. Around them, other diners pretended not to watch while hanging on every word. The staff froze in place like museum pieces. The air conditioning hummed. Ice settled in glasses. Time moved like honey poured uphill. Vinny leaned forward. Begin with what? Isabella set down her notepad, straightened her shoulders. The gesture seemed small but felt enormous. With your education. The words landed like slaps. She continued in flawless Italian, her voice carrying across the silent dining room. Forse dovrei iniziare insegnandole che I soldi non comprano il rispetto, solo l'illusione di averlo. The translation hung in the air like incense. Perhaps I should start by teaching you that money doesn't buy respect, only the illusion of having it. Vinny's face went through several colors. Red, white, something between fury and shock. His lieutenants looked at each other like soldiers who'd just heard the wrong password. Isabella wasn't finished, and "Oh, forse," she continued, her Italian flowing like water over stone. "Preferisce che continui in inglese così anche I suoi amici possono capire quanto è piccolo un uomo che ha bisogno di umiliare gli altri per sentirsi grande? Or perhaps you'd prefer I continue in English so your friends can also understand how small a man needs to be, to humiliate others to feel big." The restaurant held its breath. Crystals trembled in the chandelier. Somewhere in the kitchen, a plate fell and shattered. Vinny's hand moved toward his jacket. Stopped. His eyes locked on Isabella's face, searching for fear, submission, the crack in her armor that would let him back in control. He found nothing. She picked up her notepad. "Now then, what would you like to order?" The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Vincent Torino sat motionless, his hand still hovering near his jacket. The $1,000 remained spread across white linen, untouched. Around them, the Palazzo Nero had transformed into a theater where everyone pretended not to watch while memorizing every detail. Isabella's pen clicked once. The sound seemed to echo through the dining room like a gunshot. She waited, patient, professional, as if she hadn't just delivered the verbal equivalent of a slap across the face of the most dangerous man in 3 states. Vinny's breathing was audible now, controlled, deliberate. The kind of breathing that preceded very bad decisions or very calculated ones. His lieutenant closest to the wall shifted slightly, instinctively positioning himself between his boss and the nearest exit. Old habits. Survival reflexes honed in rooms where conversations ended with body bags. "You know who I am?" Vinny's voice had dropped to a whisper, quieter than the air conditioning, more dangerous than shouting. Isabella looked at him with the same expression she'd used to examine a wine stain on her uniform. Irritating. Manageable. Nothing that couldn't be cleaned up with the right approach. "You're a customer who owes me an apology and a dinner order." The audacity of it hung in the air like smoke from a forbidden cigarette. Around them, other diners held their breath. The sommelier dropped his wine key. It clattered against marble like scattered teeth. Vinny's jaw twitched. Once. Twice. His fingers drummed against the table in a rhythm that sounded like Morse code for violence. But something else flickered behind his eyes. Not quite respect, not quite fear. Something newer, unfamiliar. Confusion. For 30 years, Vincent Torino had spoken and people had listened. He'd gestured and empires had crumbled. He'd whispered and fortunes had changed hands. The last person who'd contradicted him was feeding fish in the Hudson River. But this woman, this nobody in a black uniform and sensible shoes, was looking at him like he was just another rude customer who needed to be managed. "Marco," he spoke without turning his head. "Pay the check. We're leaving." Marco, thin as a blade and twice as sharp, reached for his wallet with obvious relief. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut. Everyone wanted out of this moment, this collision of worlds that had no business intersecting. But Isabella didn't step back. "Actually, sir, you haven't ordered anything yet. There's nothing to pay for." Vinny's head turned slowly. The movement was mechanical, predatory. "What did you say?" "You came here for dinner. You made a proposition. I answered in the language you requested. Now you're leaving without ordering, which means you're also leaving without paying me the $1,000 you offered." The money lay between them like evidence in a murder trial. Green bills that had transformed from an insult into a debt. The mathematics of respect calculated in currency and pride. Vinny stared at the cash, then at Isabella, then at his men, who were all suddenly fascinated by their water glasses. The restaurant had gone so quiet that the ice maker in the bar sounded like thunder. "You want the money?" It wasn't a question. Isabella treated it like one anyway. "I want what was promised. You offered payment for a service. I provided the service. Better than you expected, I'd imagine." The corner of Vinny's mouth twitched. If anyone else had been watching, they might have called it the beginning of a smile. But nobody was watching that closely. Nobody wanted to see whatever was happening behind Vincent Torino's eyes. He picked up the bills, counted them slowly, made sure everyone could see the thickness of the stack, the crisp newness of the hundreds. Money that smelled like possibility and tasted like compromise. "You know what this is?" He held up the cash. "This is more than most people make in a month, hell, more than some people make in 3 months. Isabella's expression didn't change. "Is that supposed to impress me?" "It's supposed to remind you of your place." My place is serving customers. Your place is deciding what you want to eat. We both seem to be confused about our roles tonight. The words hit like precision strikes. Each one calculated, measured, designed to cut through bluster and land exactly where they do the most damage to his carefully constructed authority. Vinny set the money down, smoothed it with his palm. The gesture was almost tender, almost regretful. What's your name? Isabella. Isabella what? She hesitated for the first time since approaching the table. Personal information was currency in this world. Names had weight. Histories had consequences. Chen. He nodded slowly. Isabella Chen. Italian mother? Chinese father? Does it matter? Everything matters. Background, family, education, debts. He paused on the last word. Let it hang in the air like a threat wrapped in silk. Everyone has pressure points, Isabella Chen. Everyone has something they can't afford to lose. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ice formed in wine glasses. Conversations at other tables died completely. Even the kitchen had gone silent. Isabella's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. The first crack in her composure. The first hint that Vincent Torino's words had found their target. Is that a threat, sir? It's an observation. You're educated. Well-spoken. You speak at least 3 languages fluently. So what's a woman like you doing serving drinks to men like me? The question hung between them like a blade suspended by thread. Personal. Invasive. Designed to probe for weakness and exploit whatever it found. Isabella met his gaze without flinching. Making a living. There are easier ways to make a living. Better ways. Less dangerous ways. The word dangerous floated in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. A reminder of what he was. What he could do. What happened to people who forgot their place in his world? Are you offering me a job, Mr. Torino? Vincent Torino. She nodded as if the name meant nothing. As if she hadn't just heard the title of the man who owned half the city and operated the other half. As if his reputation for making problems disappear permanently was just another entry on his resume. Well, Mr. Torino, I appreciate the career advice, but I'm satisfied with my current position. Vinny laughed. The sound was sharp, brittle, like glass breaking under pressure. Your current position, right. He stood slowly, his frame casting a shadow across the table. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, the kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller just by existing in them. Tell me, Isabella Chen, what happens when your current position disappears? The threat was naked now, undressed of pretense or subtlety, a promise wrapped in a question. Isabella didn't blink. Then I find another position, and if all the positions disappear, then I create my own opportunities. Vinny stared at her for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face like he was memorizing every detail, every line, every expression, banking information for future use. He picked up the $1,000, folded it once, twice, tucked it into his jacket pocket. Keep the Italian lessons to yourself, sweetheart. Not everyone appreciates education. He turned to leave, stopped, looked back over his shoulder. But if you ever want to discuss opportunities, you know where to find me. Then he was gone, his men following like shadows fleeing light. The restaurant slowly exhaled. Conversations resumed in whispers. Ice clinked in glasses. Life pretended to return to normal. Isabella stood alone beside the empty table, her notepad still clutched in her hand. She looked down at the white linen where the money had been. Clean, pristine, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that would follow her home. Something that would wait in dark corners and quiet moments. Something that would remind her that in Vincent Torino's world, every conversation was a negotiation, and every negotiation had consequences. She picked up the water glasses, cleared the unused silverware, wiped down the table until it gleamed. Professional, efficient, invisible. As if dignity could be laundered like linens and respect could be polished like silver. The rain started at midnight, not the gentle kind that whispered against windows, but the brutal kind that hammered the city like fists against flesh. Isabella Chen sat in her studio apartment, listening to water drum against glass while steam rose from her untouched cup of tea. She hadn't spoken since leaving the restaurant, hadn't eaten, hadn't done anything except sit in the dark and replay every word, every pause, every calculated threat wrapped in silk. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at the screen until it went dark. 30 seconds later it buzzed again. Same number. This time she answered. Hello? Silence. Then breathing. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of breathing that suggested someone was choosing their words very carefully. Isabella Chen. Not a question. Vincent Torino's voice sounded different through the phone. Closer. More intimate. Like he was sitting in the room with her instead of speaking through electronic signals bounced off towers and satellites. How did you get this number? Does it matter? A pause. Ice clinking in a glass. I've been thinking about our conversation. Isabella walked to the window. 4 floors below, the street was empty except for rain and shadows. No cars, no pedestrians. Nothing that suggested surveillance, but everything that felt like it. There's nothing to think about. You offered money for a service. I provided the service. You left without paying. About that? His voice carried amusement. I'm prepared to honor our agreement. The moment passed. Did it? Another pause. Longer this time. See, I don't think it did. I think you're still thinking about that money. Wondering what you could do with it. Bills you could pay. Problems you could solve. Isabella's reflection stared back from rain-streaked glass. 26 years old. Tired eyes. Shoulders that carried more weight than they should. Behind her reflection, her apartment told its own story. Furniture from thrift stores. Textbooks stacked like prayers for a better future. Medical bills paper-clipped to rejection letters from banks. Everyone has pressure points, Torino continued. Everyone has something they can't afford to lose. Is that supposed to scare me? It's supposed to educate you. The sound of a chair creaking. Leather against weight. Your brother Marcus, 16 years old, diagnosed with juvenile diabetes 3 years ago. Insulin costs what, $300 a month? That's with insurance. Without insurance, the phone trembled in Isabella's hand. Not from fear. From rage so pure it felt like swallowing fire. Don't what? Don't acknowledge reality? Your mother died 2 years ago. Medical debt. Your father disappeared when Marcus was diagnosed. Classic pattern. Some people handle pressure better than others. Isabella closed her eyes, breathed through her nose, counted to 10 in 3 languages: Italian, Chinese, English. The mathematics of calm in a world that rewarded violence. What do you want? Dinner? Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. Romano's on 5th. Romano's. Where federal judges ate with their wives and senators celebrated their victories. Where conversations were recorded and favors were traded like currency. Where being seen with Vincent Torino was either a death sentence or a promotion, depending on which side of the law you called home. I work tomorrow night. No, you don't. I called your manager. You have the evening off. The casual demonstration of power hit like ice water. He'd made one phone call and rearranged her life, changed her schedule, invaded her space, proved that her autonomy was an illusion he could shatter whenever convenient. Refusing would be, he paused, tasting the words, unwise. And accepting would be what? Wise? Educational. You speak 3 languages, Isabella, but you don't speak the most important one yet, which is power. The line went dead. Isabella stared at her reflection until the phone's screen faded to black. Outside, the rain continued its assault on glass and concrete, and dreams that couldn't afford to be broken. She walked to her kitchenette, opened the refrigerator. 3 containers of leftover takeout, a carton of milk that expired yesterday, insulin vials lined up like soldiers in formation, each one worth more than most people spent on lunch. Her laptop sat open on the counter. Browser history told its own story. Job applications, student loan forgiveness programs, medical payment plans, the digital archaeology of desperation dressed up as ambition. She opened a new tab, typed Vincent Torino into the search bar. The results painted a picture in headlines and mugshots and newspaper articles that danced around facts like lawyers around truth. Real estate mogul, suspected organized crime connections, federal investigation ongoing, charitable donations to hospitals and schools, citations for building code violations, photographs at society galas standing next to governors and judges and men whose smiles never reached their eyes. A man who existed in the space between legal and illegal, where handshakes meant more than contracts and silence was more valuable than gold. Her phone buzzed again. Text message. Same unknown number. The car will pick you up at 7:30. Wear something nice. Isabella stared at the message until the words blurred. Then she typed back, "I didn't say yes." The response came immediately. "You didn't say no?" She set the phone down, walked to her closet, pushed aside server uniforms and interview clothes and the dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral. Behind everything else, wrapped in plastic like evidence in a crime scene, hung the black cocktail dress she'd bought for college graduation, before life had taught her that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. She touched the fabric through the plastic, silk that felt like possibility and tasted like compromise. Tomorrow night she would sit across from a man who spoke power like a native language. She would smile and nod and pretend that dignity wasn't something that could be bought and sold like shares in a corporation. She would remember her brother's insulin and her mother's debts and the rent that was already 3 weeks late. And she would learn that some negotiations were decided before they ever began. The rain continued its percussion against glass. Somewhere in the city, Vincent Torino was planning her education. Somewhere else, Marcus was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his sister was about to enroll in a curriculum that would teach her the true cost of survival. Isabella pulled the dress from the closet, laid it across her bed like a shroud. Tomorrow night she would discover that speaking power required more than vocabulary. It required surrendering pieces of yourself you didn't know you could afford to lose. Outside, lightning split the sky. Thunder followed like applause for decisions that couldn't be undone. If you've made it this far into Isabella's story, you're witnessing something powerful. The moment when survival meets dignity, and both demand a price. This isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror reflecting choices we all face when pushed to our limits. Subscribe to see how Isabella's story unfolds, because some lessons about power can only be learned by watching someone else pay the cost. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to buy your dignity? What would you have done in Isabella's position? Romanos existed in shadows and whispered promises. Mahogany walls absorbed secrets like sponges absorbed blood. Crystal stemware caught candlelight and fractured it into 1,000 watching eyes. The kind of place where handshakes sealed fates and dinner conversations rewrote city ordinances. Isabella arrived at 8 precisely. The black dress fit like armor she'd forgotten how to wear. Silk against skin that remembered better times. Heels that clicked against marble with the rhythm of a countdown. Vincent Torino waited at a corner table. Same charcoal suit. Same predatory smile. But something different in his posture. Relaxed. Confident. A chess player who'd already seen the endgame. You came. Isabella sat without being invited. You made it clear I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. The question is whether you understand the cost of each option. A waiter appeared like smoke. Young. Nervous. The kind of nervous that suggested he knew exactly who paid for his silence and what happened to people who forgot their discretion. Wine? Torino asked. Water. The lady will have the Barolo, he told the waiter. The 2016. And bring the usual. The waiter vanished. Isabella stared across the table at a man who ordered her drinks like he owned her preferences. Like her autonomy was another course he could select from a menu. Presumptuous. Practical. You'll need the wine for what comes next. The restaurant hummed with carefully orchestrated ambiance. Soft jazz that masked conversations. Lighting dim enough to hide expressions but bright enough to read contracts. Around them, other diners played their own games of power and pretense. Your brother had an episode yesterday. The words hit like physical blows. Isabella's water glass stopped halfway to her lips. What? Marcus, 16 years old, diabetic, had an incident at school. Paramedics called. He's fine, by the way. This time. Isabella's hand trembled. Barely perceptible, but Torino caught it. Filed it away for future use. How do you... No. Information is currency, Isabella. More valuable than money. More permanent than gold. He leaned forward. Your brother's medical records. Your employment history. Your credit score. Your mother's death certificate. All very interesting reading. The wine arrived. Blood red in crystal glasses. The waiter poured with ceremony that felt like ritual. Like communion for sins not yet committed. You invaded my privacy. I protected my investment. Torino raised his glass. To education. Isabella didn't touch her wine. Couldn't trust her hands not to shake. Couldn't trust her voice not to break. What do you want? Your attention? Your time? Your cooperation? Each word landed with precision. Calculated impact. Designed to probe for weakness and exploit whatever they found. Cooperation with what? Torino sipped his wine, savored it like he savored her discomfort. I own restaurants, hotels, construction companies, import-export businesses, all legitimate, all profitable, all requiring very specific skill sets, such as language skills, cultural understanding, the ability to translate between different worlds. Isabella finally lifted her wine glass. The liquid tasted like copper and compromise, like decisions that couldn't be undone. You want me to work for you. I want you to work with me. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Torino laughed. The sound carried genuine amusement, almost affectionate, the way a teacher might laugh at a student's clever question. You have spine. I respect that. But spine without strategy is just stubbornness. And stubbornness without power is just noise. The main course arrived without ordering. Veal osso buco, risotto with truffle oil, food that cost more than Isabella made in a week. The waiter served with reverent silence, then disappeared back into the shadows. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You're too thin. Stress will do that. Financial pressure, family obligations, the weight of responsibility. He cut his veal with surgical precision. I can make all of that disappear. For a price. Everything has a price. The question is whether you understand what you're buying. Isabella picked at her risotto. Each bite tasted like chalk and surrender. Around them, the restaurant continued its orchestrated dance of power and pretense. Deals sealed with handshakes. Favors traded like currency. Lives altered between appetizer and dessert. What exactly are you offering? Security. For you. For Marcus. Medical coverage that doesn't require rationing insulin. A future that doesn't depend on tips and overtime. In exchange for what? Torino set down his fork, studied her face like a document he was considering signing. Your skills, your education, your ability to move between worlds without attracting attention, laundering money, facilitating commerce. International trade requires complex negotiations, cultural sensitivity, language expertise. You'd be surprised how often business deals fail because of simple misunderstandings. Isabella drank more wine, felt it burn through the ice in her chest. And if I refuse, then you refuse. You go back to serving drinks to men who think your education is amusing. You watch your brother ration his medication. You pay minimum on your mother's medical debt for the next 20 years. He paused. Let the weight of reality settle between them like ash from a crematorium. Or you accept that survival sometimes requires compromising with people you'd rather avoid. The wine was affecting her judgment, making the room feel warmer, the offer more reasonable. The man across from her less like a predator and more like a lifeline wrapped in expensive fabric. I need to think about it. Of course, take your time. Marcus's next doctor's appointment is Thursday. Insurance covers 80%. That leaves about $400 out of pocket, plus medication, plus the copay for his emergency room visit yesterday. Each number hit like a hammer blow. Precise. Brutal. Designed to demonstrate exactly how much thinking she could afford to do. This is coercion. This is opportunity. The coercion comes later, if you make the wrong choice. Isabella laughed. The sound surprised her. Sharp. Bitter. The kind of laughter that happened when absurdity collided with inevitability. At least you're honest about it. Honesty is a luxury I can afford. You, on the other hand, have bills to pay. The dessert arrived unbidden. Tiramisu with gold leaf. Sweet enough to mask the taste of compromise. Rich enough to remind her of everything she couldn't afford. If I say yes, when you say yes. When I say yes, what happens to the woman who stood up to you in the restaurant? The one who spoke truth to power and walked away with her dignity intact? Torino smiled. The expression was almost gentle, almost paternal. The way a surgeon might smile before explaining that the operation would be successful, but the patient would never walk the same way again. She evolves, adapts, learns that dignity is a luxury people pay for with other people's money. Isabella finished her wine, set the glass down with finality that echoed through the restaurant like a gavel closing a case. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. I already have my answer. You just need time to accept it. He signaled for the check, paid in cash. Bills crisp enough to cut. Money that smelled like possibility and tasted like surrender. The car will take you home. Sleep well, Isabella. Tomorrow begins your real education. She stood on unsteady legs. The wine, the weight of decision, the knowledge that some choices were made before you ever sat down at the table. Outside, rain fell like tears from a sky that had seen too much. The car waited. Black sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who asked no questions. Isabella slid into leather seats that felt like a confession booth, closed her eyes, listened to rain drum against glass while her phone buzzed with texts from Marcus asking if she was okay. She typed back, "Everything's fine. I love you." The first lie in a curriculum that would teach her the true cost of survival. 3 months later, Isabella Chen no longer existed. In her place sat a woman named Isabella Romano, Vincent Torino's cultural liaison. Business cards printed on cream paper. Office on the 32nd floor. Salary that paid Marcus's medical bills without checking the balance first. The transformation had been surgical, precise, like editing a photograph until the original subject disappeared behind layers of digital manipulation. She wore Armani now instead of polyester, carried a briefcase instead of a serving tray, spoke in boardrooms where decisions worth millions were made between sips of espresso and glances at Swiss watches. But the mirror in her penthouse bathroom still showed the same eyes. Tired, hollow, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure because it lived in the soul instead of the body. Her phone buzzed. Vincent's number. Conference room. 10 minutes. No greeting, no pleasantries. 3 months of cooperation had stripped away the pretense of courtesy. She was an employee now, a tool, useful until she wasn't. Isabella walked through corridors lined with abstract art and floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread below like a game board where she'd learned to play by rules she'd never wanted to understand. The conference room held 4 men in identical suits. Lawyers, accountants, the kind of people who made problems disappear through creative interpretation of tax codes and immigration laws. Vincent sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline in glass and steel and ambition that reached toward heaven, while its foundation rested in hell. "Gentlemen, meet Isabella Romano, our cultural expert." She took her place at the table, opened her briefcase, removed documents that looked legitimate enough to fool federal investigators and simple enough to hide their true purpose. "The Hong Kong situation requires delicate handling," Vincent continued. "Cultural sensitivities, language barriers, the kind of nuanced communication that prevents misunderstandings." Isabella had learned to translate Vincent's euphemisms. Hong Kong situation meant money laundering through shell companies. Cultural sensitivities meant bribing officials. Misunderstandings meant people who asked too many questions. "The transfers need to appear as legitimate business investments," one lawyer said. "Art acquisitions, real estate purchases, cultural exchange programs. Isabella will handle the documentation. Her language skills make her invaluable for international relations." She nodded. Professional. Efficient. A machine programmed to facilitate commerce that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal. But as she opened the first file, her phone vibrated. Text message from Marcus. "Sis, got into Columbia pre-med, full scholarship. Thanks for believing in me." The words hit like shrapnel from an explosion she'd forgotten she'd caused. Columbia. Her brother was going to Columbia, the same university where she'd studied literature and dreamed of teaching children to love language the way she did. Her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. Vincent caught it, filed it away for future use. "Problem, Isabella?" "No, sir, personal matter. Family is important. That's why we do what we do. To protect the people we love." The meeting continued for 2 hours. Documents signed, accounts established. Money moved through digital channels like blood through arteries, carrying life to legitimate businesses and death to honest competition. When the lawyers left, Vincent remained. He stood by the windows, silhouetted against afternoon light that turned him into a shadow with expensive taste. "Your brother's acceptance letter, Columbia Medical School." Isabella's breath caught. "How did you—" "No, I made some calls. Pulled some strings. Academic committees appreciate generous donations from civic-minded businessmen." The room felt smaller suddenly, airless, like a tomb sealed from the inside. "You bought his acceptance. I facilitated his opportunity. There's a difference." Isabella stared at the documents spread across the conference table. Contracts written in languages that disguised theft as commerce. Her signature authorizing transactions that would fund Marcus's education with money, stolen from people who'd never know their names. He earned it. Of course he did. Exceptional grades, perfect test scores, glowing recommendations, all legitimate. I simply ensured the committee understood his potential. Vincent turned from the window. His smile was gentle, almost paternal, the way a father might smile while explaining why his daughter couldn't marry for love. You're angry. I'm grateful. The words tasted like ash. Marcus deserves this opportunity. He deserves many things: security, education, a future where he doesn't have to choose between insulin and rent money. Vincent walked around the table, stopped behind her chair. All things you've provided through your cultural expertise. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle, possessive, the kind of touch that reminded her who paid for her brother's medicine and her penthouse apartment, and the Armani suits that had replaced her server uniform. You've been an excellent investment, Isabella. Profitable, reliable, discreet. She stood, walked to the windows. The city stretched below like a circuit board where electricity flowed through channels of corruption and compromise. What happens when I'm no longer useful? That depends on how useful you choose to remain. Isabella pressed her palm against cold glass. 32 floors below, people moved like ants through concrete mazes, working, living, surviving, without selling pieces of their souls for monthly installments. My brother's acceptance letter. Was it ever real? Vincent joined her at the window. Their reflections overlapped in glass that showed the truth and the lie simultaneously. Does it matter? He's going to Colombia. He'll become a doctor, save lives, help people. The means matter less than the outcome. The means are all that matter. Said like someone who's never had to choose between principles and survival. Isabella closed her eyes. Saw Marcus at 16, rationing insulin because insurance wouldn't cover the full prescription. Saw her mother's medical bills stacked like accusations on the kitchen table. Saw herself 3 months ago, serving drinks to men who treated her like furniture with the capacity for speech. When she opened her eyes, Vincent was watching her reflection in the glass. You're thinking about leaving. I'm thinking about living. Those aren't mutually exclusive. You're alive, Isabella. More alive than you've ever been. Powerful, protected, providing for your family in ways you never could have imagined. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus, I can't wait to help people the way you helped me. You're my hero, sis. The words cut deeper than any threat Vincent could have made. Her brother thought she was his hero, thought her success was inspiration instead of corruption, thought the money that paid for his future came from intelligence instead of compromise. He can never know. He'll never need to know. As long as you remember that his future depends on your continued cooperation. Isabella turned from the window, gathered her documents, closed her briefcase with finality that echoed through the conference room like a cell door slamming shut. The Hong Kong transfers will be completed by Friday. I know they will. She walked toward the door, stopped, looked back at a man who owned her brother's future and her own past. Vincent? Yes? When this is over, when Marcus graduates, when the debts are paid. It's never over, Isabella. That's the beauty of family obligations. They're renewable, transferable. Marcus will have children someday. They'll need education, security, protection. The door closed behind her with a whisper that sounded like surrender. In the elevator, Isabella stared at her reflection in polished steel. Armani suit, diamond earrings, shoes that cost more than most people's rent. She looked successful, powerful, free. But freedom was just another word for a cage built from gold instead of iron. Thank you for following Isabella's journey through this dark labyrinth of power and compromise. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the price of survival in a world where dignity is a luxury most can't afford, please subscribe. These aren't just stories. They're mirrors reflecting the choices we all face when pushed to our limits. What would you have done in Isabella's position? When does survival justify compromise? Share your thoughts below. Because sometimes the most important conversations happen in the space between the story's end and real life's beginning. Your engagement helps us continue exploring these difficult truths that entertainment often avoids.